Yeah, so essentially this can be properties valued over 100,000, in most cases here, 100,000 plus or somewhere right in that range. In a lot of cases too, these properties, in fact, sometimes you have properties that are not necessarily highly valued, but they bring in a lot of rent. In fact, in some cases, properties are more impressive for the rent potential they have than even their value. A lot of properties bring in more rent than their value would really justify. All these properties, though, have great rental potential here and were picked up for very low percentages of value as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, this one was ended up picked up for 42,000. Uh, quite aggressive on the bids. Now, doing the on-site evaluation, we can see newer roof, newer siding. You know, really overall, a pretty good deal. Uh, Especially as we break it down a little bit more. So, here's where we're located. You can see that we're kind of in a subdivision within here. You know, the Redfin is valued at about 121,000. What was kind of interesting though is this is the pretty much the exact same home. This home has a little garage like there. The only difference is you've got this full porch instead of just that, the kind of that front porch on the other one, and it sold for 150. So, kind of looking at it, this is definitely one where it's already pretty clean, but you could do some extra things to it and probably, beef it up, or you could just rent it as is.
Yeah, which I mean, really, just the way it is, right now, you could rent it out and probably do really well. If you wanted to try to increase the value or get some more money out of it, you certainly could. But at 42,000, they have picked it up for under a third of value. We could say. I mean, in fact, it's probably somewhere right in that range. It might have even paid closer to 25% of value. And what that means is just that this property has the potential to bring in $1,300 a month in rent. And so they've automatically walked into equity of 80 to 100,000 with how much they paid for the property, but it has the potential to bring in upwards of $15,000 a year. Which is pretty good rental income considering they only paid 42,000 for it total.
Yeah, well, it's going to pay itself off in about 2.5 years. So let's say that there's extra cost. Maybe it pays it off within 3 years. This is a business that you pay, 42,000 into, or let's say we're into it 50, and it pays itself off within 3 years, and you make an extra $16,000 a year. Let's say there's less expense. You're still making 13 or $14,000 a year that's going directly into your pocket. You do that 5 or 10 times. Now you're bringing in some serious income.